Well, good morning, everyone. We are so excited to have you for today's conversation on building your own audience. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and put any questions in there as we go along. I believe we'll be having a poll uh, launching, essentially just to say, what brought you here today. So feel free to answer that when that launches and we will get started. A little bit about Nuaki. Nuaki is an engagement agency that works with organizations to design and build new transformational experiences. Our services include experience design and production, engagement consulting, and marketing strategy. My name is Wyatt Tinder, and I'm a partner at Nuaki, and I lead our creative services team. Saratoga, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Saratoga or Toga, and I do our digital marketing here at Nuaki.
So, what brings us here today? Why are we having this conversation about owned audiences? Well, because not all audiences are equal. As marketers, there are audiences that we borrow and audiences that we own. A borrowed audience is fragile. So, what do we mean by a borrowed audience? These are audiences that live on a platform you don't own and for whom you do not have data. For example, audiences on social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, now X, Instagram, or TikTok. These platforms are powerful. They help you to quickly reach the right people and build an audience to view your content, but you don't own those audiences. Building an audience on someone else's platform creates uncertainty. A good example of that is what we've seen with Twitter, now X. If your brand and its audience has been primarily built on that platform, what do you do when something happens to it? What happens if your account somehow gets suspended? What happens if the platform folds? Essentially, you'd have to start over from scratch. An owned audience, on the other hand, is more sustainable. An owned audience is one for whom you have data, so email addresses or phone numbers, that you can take and move between platforms that you control and that have opted in to engage with your brand and your content. So, as a definition, an owned audience is a customer population contained on platforms that you and your company maintains complete control over. Saratoga?
Yeah, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the places that your owned audience lives. So this can include things like website account holders. These can be blog subscribers. This also applies to e-learning and membership platforms, as well as email lists and SMS lists. The important thing to remember here is that an owned audience is not a community. Your owned audience is downloadable and exportable, meaning that you have the ability to back it up. So like Wyatt mentioned, in case the platform your audience is hosted on goes away or breaks, you still have access to the audience itself. So think about social media. You can't download your Instagram followers and create a list of their emails. So if Instagram goes down, like it did a couple years ago, those followers are gone. Now, if you have a list of blog subscribers that you downloaded, you still have that audience, even if your blog crashes. And that's the difference there between that owned audience and a more general community.
So, a big part of the reason why we talk about this is because renting or borrowing audiences is losing you money. When you rent your audience, it's a pay to play game. The platforms that that host your audience are in control. So in order to reach them, you need to spend marketing budget. This is an interesting stat I think I heard a few years ago, but on the average organic social media post, only about 1% of those who are your followers on Facebook will actually see that content in their feed. And that's where, Facebook is very pay to play, or these social media platforms are very pay to play. You need to boost your content in order for it to be seen by the people you want to see it. And as we mentioned, earlier, the potential to lose your audience could cost you much more in the future. Or, and I know we've talked a lot about, if a platform crashes or goes down, but in the reverse, what happens if a new social media channel busts onto the scene, similar to how TikTok did in 2020? If you had customer data in, say, a newsletter list, you could send an email telling your customers or your subscribers, follow us on this new platform. Sharing that same message on a competitor social media platform doesn't really have the same influence. And you don't necessarily want to boost a Facebook ad saying that you're now on TikTok. It just doesn't really make sense, and probably wouldn't work very well algorithmically.
One of the best parts about having an owned audience is this access, this direct access it provides. Direct access to your customers and intended audience equals more conversions. So an owned audience can actually enhance your lead and an audience engagement and click-through rates, which is much more helpful data. It can also nurture customer relationships and builds loyalty within those people who are attracted to your brand. It can also establish a dialogue, receive feedback, and improve customer interactions because you have this two-way channel with your actual audience. And it can help you to identify which content resonates most with your audience. So what are they the most excited about? What are the topics that they seem very interested in? Opening this sort of two-way street can give you more creativity, more conversions, and more data to work with so that you can really access your audience in a way that's more meaningful.
So how do we recommend capturing audience data? So there are many ways that you can do this, starting with creating interactive quizzes and surveys to capture valuable insights. There are a ton of tools that you can use to do this. WooBox is one, but on the survey side, there's SurveyMonkey, Wufoo. There's a million different platforms out there that can help you do this. But essentially, find ways to gamify individuals giving you their data. Offer incentives such as giveaways or discounts. You see this a lot. Offer something of high value, but keep it gated, meaning someone has to give you their email address or phone number to receive said discount. Use sign-up forms for newsletters, memberships, or accessing content on your website. Do a little audit of your website. Is it clear where people can sign up for your newsletter? And then when they sign up for your newsletter, is it clear what kind of content that you're going to receive? Just make sure that that's really clear and actually will drive people signing up. Leverage the authority of your audience through user-generated content that will attract and engage others to your brand. So a good example of this would be, maybe a photo contest where people submit photos related to your brand. You're getting content that you can use for your channels, and you're also getting that audience data. And lastly, host in-person or virtual events and make sure to collect registrations. I see it all the time where people use Facebook solely, or Facebook events solely, as the way that they're getting people to come to their program. But again, someone marking interested or going on Facebook that's not data that you can then, reuse. So make sure that you use platforms like Eventbrite or others to really capture registrations, and they offer flexibility to include custom questions or additional questions so that you find out even more information about the people who are coming. And then once you have all of this data, you can really start to analyze and retarget customers based on their behaviors. You can take a look at what content they're responding to. You can look, if you have a data-rich environment, you could look at how they're interacting with your website, what they're buying, and you can then map out their customer journey and move them through sequences of messages that nurture them into action.
And we should have a poll for this slide as well. So that should pop up, and feel free to answer that. Right, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So there can be many temptations to cut corners or do things the easy way when building an owned audience, but we really urge you to avoid some of these morally questionable and costly errors when you're building your audience. And these tactics include things like ignoring data privacy and using data freely. So ignoring privacy settings or ignoring opt-outs and just sending people stuff anyway. Purchasing huge email lists and focusing solely on quantity. This probably looks like buying big lists and then spamming them in sort of like a spray and pray campaign method. Going along into that, neglecting engagement metrics, so playing a guessing game and not nurturing the leads instead of focusing and narrowing in on the people you actually want. It's more of like, let's send this out to as many people possible and see what happens. And finally, inconsistencies with your brand. So this looks like poor user experience and engagement. That comes across a bunch of different ways, but it could be something like posting too much or posting stuff that doesn't necessarily make sense, things that are going to essentially irritate your audience. So you want this audience to have an overall positive impression of your brand, and these types of mistakes or questionable methods of contacting them can really tarnish a reputation. So it can be tempting to sort of take the easy way out and do some of these things, but in the long run, it would do more damage actually to your audience. So it's better to avoid them completely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we see this a lot when people do finally get data that they're tempted to use personalization right away, but they don't take the time to really dive into how to do it well. And so you get an email or a text that, has the wrong first name in it, personalized, or, has something that's wrong. And that can be, really, really tarnish the experience you have with the brand. Ultimately, building your own audience is an ongoing process that really will pay dividends for you over time. And so we highly encourage that you take time to plan and do it well.
Yeah, so if you're looking for the too long didn't read version of building an owned audience, these are the sort of 3 key takeaways you can focus on after today. The first is quality over quantity. We've talked about this a lot, but focus on attracting and retaining engaged, relevant customers or subscribers. Don't just try to be something for everyone. Really hone in on who your audience is, what that persona is for the type of person you want to attract, and then focus all your efforts on that. You need your niche. You don't have to be everything for everyone. The second is that data is gold. You really want to leverage the data that you collect for personalization, segmentation, and retargeting. So it's not just enough to have that data and be able to point to it and be like, here's what we have. You have to be able to understand how to use that to sort of further your own audience. So it's not just about collecting it, it's about actually being able to analyze and synthesize and do something with that data. And then finally, consistency matters. So maintain a consistent brand identity and a content strategy that is going to be pushed out to your audience. So it's pretty important to sort of have an idea of that before you even start this whole process, but it's very crucial to have that consistency so that people understand who you are, what your brand stands for, and what they're getting from you. So building and maintaining an owned audience definitely takes a lot of work and persistence, but keeping these sort of 3 takeaways or goals in mind are going to be really instrumental in your efforts.
And then here are the 3 things we suggest you do right now. The first would be to use existing high value content that you have to get data and direct your audience to an owned channel. So, for example, do you have a really high quality white paper or a really high quality blog or ebook? Can you gate it? Can you put it behind some sort of sign up so that in order for people to get that resource, they have to give you their information? Are there giveaways that you could set up? Are there things of value that you could offer as a giveaway that people need to send their, give you their data in order to be entered to win? Are there events that you could host externally? Think about what you have to offer and the ways in which you could gate that in order to get more data your way. Put a little bit more TLC in creating an email newsletter or SMS program. Really think about what CRM you're using because these are channels that are very high value and drive conversion. So if you're not currently using email or SMS, if you're not, if you're not getting that data, if you don't have a content program, really start to think through what that could be and put some energy there. And then actively participate in discussions and engage with your audience directly. So make sure to use the data that you collect to inform your decision making moving forward, and provide opportunities for your audience to send you recommendations or feedback or suggestions, as that kind of like two-way street. And then we have time for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to share them in the chat, and we can have a conversation. I'll wait a few moments. I'll wait a few moments to see if anyone has any questions, but otherwise, please feel free to connect with Saratoga or I on LinkedIn. We're happy to keep the conversation going there. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Please feel free to connect with us and have a great day.